The bus was packed, the kind of full where every inch of space mattered. People clutched their bags, held onto metal poles, and tried their best to avoid eye contact. It was just another late afternoon in the city, with tired workers heading home and students scrolling through their phones, counting the minutes until their stop. Jamal sat near the middle, earbuds in, nodding slightly to the rhythm of a song only he could hear. He had just finished basketball practice, his gym bag slung over his shoulder, the faint scent of sweat clinging to his hoodie. It had been a long day, school, practice, and now this crowded bus ride home. His legs ached, and all he wanted was to sit back, listen to his music, and zone out. But then he saw her. A pregnant woman stepped onto the bus, her belly prominent under her coat. She hesitated for a moment, glancing around, clearly searching for a seat. No one moved. Some passengers avoided her gaze, pretending they didn't see her. Others were too lost in their own exhaustion to notice. Jamal didn't even think twice. He pulled out his earbuds, stood up, and motioned to her. "Here, ma'am, you can sit here." The woman's eyes widened, surprised. "Oh, thank you. That's really kind of you." Jamal just nodded, stepping aside so she could take his seat. He grabbed onto a nearby pole as the bus jerked forward, forcing him to steady himself. It wasn't a big deal. His mom had raised him to be respectful, to help others when he could. It was just common decency. But then something unexpected happened. The woman reached into her purse, hesitated for a second, then pulled out a small folded piece of paper. She looked up at Jamal, her expression unreadable, and pressed the note into his hand. "Read this when you get home," she said softly. Before he could ask what it was, she turned her attention back to the window, lost in thought. Jamal stared at the note in his hand. His fingers tightened around it. Why did she sound so serious? Why give him a note instead of just saying whatever she wanted to say? He shoved it into his pocket, telling himself he'd read it later. But for the rest of the ride, he couldn't shake the feeling that something about this moment was bigger than it seemed, and he had no idea just how much his life was about to change. Jamal couldn't stop thinking about the note, even as the bus rattled through the city streets, stopping and starting, letting passengers on and off. His mind kept circling back to the small folded paper tucked in his pocket. He told himself it was probably nothing, maybe just a simple thank you or a few kind words, but something about the way the woman had handed it to him, the look in her eyes, made it feel different. When the bus finally reached his stop, Jamal stepped off, adjusting his gym bag on his shoulder. The cool evening air hit his face, and he took a deep breath before making his way home. His neighborhood was quiet, a mix of old brick houses and newer apartment buildings. Streetlights buzzed to life as the sky darkened, and the sound of distant car horns filled the air. As he walked, he slid his hand into his pocket, his fingers brushing against the note. He thought about opening it right there on the sidewalk, but something held him back. Not yet. He wanted to be somewhere quiet, where he could really focus on whatever was written inside. Jamal's house was small but warm, the kind of place that always smelled like home-cooked meals and carried the faintest echo of laughter, even when no one was talking. His mom was in the kitchen, stirring a pot on the stove, her face lighting up when she saw him. "There's my baby," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "How was school?" "Same as always," Jamal said, setting his bag down by the door. "Practice was rough, though. Coach had us running drills forever." His mom shook her head with a knowing smile. "Well, I hope you're hungry, 'cause dinner's almost ready." Jamal nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He glanced toward the hallway, thinking about his room, thinking about the note. "You okay?" His mom's voice brought him back. "Yeah," he said quickly, "just tired." She gave him a look like she wasn't fully convinced, but she didn't press him. "Go wash up. We'll eat in a few." Jamal headed to his room, shutting the door behind him. His heart was beating a little faster now as he pulled the note from his pocket and sat on the edge of his bed. His fingers hesitated before unfolding it. The paper was slightly crumpled from being in his pocket, and the handwriting was neat but hurried, like the words had been written in a rush. He read the first line. "You don't know me, but I need your help." Jamal frowned, his eyes scanning the next few lines. "I don't have much time. Please, if you're reading this, don't ignore it. There's something I need you to do. I can't explain here. It's too dangerous. But if you can, meet me at the coffee shop on 8th and Maple tomorrow at 4 p.m. Please, it's important." Jamal read the note again, his mind racing. Dangerous? Need your help? He barely knew this woman. Why would she be asking for his help? And why give him a note instead of just saying it to him on the bus? His first thought was that it had to be a mistake. Maybe she had meant to give the note to someone else. Or maybe it was some kind of joke. But deep down, he didn't believe that. Something about the way she had looked at him, the urgency in her voice told him this was real. But real what? He leaned back against the wall, staring at the note. He could just ignore it, pretend he never got it. He didn't know this woman. Whatever she was caught up in, it had nothing to do with him. And yet, something inside him wouldn't let it go. The next day at school, Jamal could barely focus. His mind kept drifting back to the note, to the words scribbled on that tiny piece of paper. He hadn't told anyone, not his mom, not his friends, not even his best friend Marcus. He didn't know why, but it felt like something he needed to keep to himself, at least until he understood it better. By the time the final bell rang, his stomach was tight with indecision. Should he go? Would it be stupid to meet a stranger like that? What if it was a setup? What if it was some kind of scam? But what if it wasn't? At 3:45, he found himself standing outside the coffee shop on 8th and Maple. The place wasn't big, just a small corner cafe with large windows and a faded red awning. He could see people inside, sipping coffee, talking, tapping away at their laptops. Jamal took a deep breath, stepping forward, but before he could reach the door, he stopped. Across the street, half hidden in the shadow of a building, was a man. He was watching Jamal. Jamal's heart pounded. The man was older, maybe in his late 30s or early 40s, dressed in a dark jacket and jeans. His expression was unreadable, but there was something about the way he stood, the way his eyes stayed locked on Jamal, that sent a chill down his spine. Was he connected to the woman? Jamal's fingers tightened around the strap of his bag. He didn't know what was going on, but he had the sinking feeling that whatever this was, it was much bigger than he had expected. And now, he wasn't sure if he was walking into something he couldn't walk out of. Jamal's pulse quickened as he stood frozen on the sidewalk. The man across the street hadn't moved, but his gaze was steady, almost calculated. It wasn't the kind of look you give someone by accident. It was intentional, watching, waiting. Jamal took a slow breath and forced himself to turn back toward the coffee shop. Maybe he was overthinking it. Maybe the guy was just some random pedestrian, but deep down he knew better. He reached for the door handle, his fingers hesitating for just a second before pushing it open. A small bell chimed as he stepped inside. The coffee shop smelled like roasted beans and fresh pastries. A soft hum of conversation filled the air, the sound of steaming milk and clinking cups blending into the background. Jamal scanned the room quickly, looking for the woman. He didn't even know her name. She was there, sitting at a small table near the back. Her coat was draped over the chair, and both hands rested on her cup as if she was trying to warm them. When she saw him, relief flashed across her face, but it was quickly replaced by something else: concern. Fear? Jamal walked over slowly, pulling out the chair across from her. He sat, studying her face, searching for answers before she even spoke. Up close, she looked more tired than he remembered, dark circles under her eyes, her fingers trembling slightly as she lifted her cup to her lips. "I wasn't sure if you'd come," she said softly. Jamal leaned back, crossing his arms. "Yeah, well, you kinda made it hard to ignore." He pulled the note from his pocket and set it on the table between them. "What is this? Why me?" The woman exhaled, looking down at the note like she wasn't sure where to start. "I didn't have a choice," she admitted. "I couldn't say anything out loud on the bus. I didn't know if I was being followed." Jamal's mind immediately jumped to the man outside. His chest tightened. "You are being followed," he said, keeping his voice low. "There's a guy outside, dark jacket, standing across the street. He was watching me before I came in." Her eyes flickered toward the window, and for a second her grip on the cup tightened. Then she nodded like she had expected this. "He's not the only one." Jamal's stomach dropped. "Okay, I need you to start explaining, because right now, this is feeling like something I don't want to be part of." It was his now. She glanced around the coffee shop, then leaned in. "My name is Claire," she said quietly. "And what I'm about to tell you, it's not safe for either of us." Jamal's mouth went dry, but he forced himself to stay still, to keep listening. "I used to work for someone," Claire continued, "someone powerful. The kind of person who doesn't like loose ends." Jamal frowned. "And you're a loose end?" Claire gave a small, humorless smile. "You could say that. I found out something I wasn't supposed to. And now they want to make sure I don't talk." Jamal ran a hand over his face. "And you think I can help with this? Lady, I'm just a kid. I got school, basketball practice, and a mom who'd kill me if she knew I was sitting here listening to whatever this is." Claire shook her head. "I don't need you to fight anyone. I just need someone who isn't on their radar. Someone who can deliver something for me." Jamal's heart pounded. "Deliver what?" She reached into her bag, her hands shaking slightly, and pulled out a small flash drive. She set it on the table but kept her fingers over it, as if she wasn't quite ready to let go. "This," she whispered. "It has proof. Everything they don't want the world to know." Jamal stared at the drive like it was something dangerous. "And you want me to just, walk away with it? Take it where?" Claire's voice was urgent now. "There's a lawyer. Her name's Rebecca Hayes. She's expecting it. But if I go to her myself, they'll catch me before I get there. I don't think they're watching you yet. You could get it to her without them noticing." Jamal exhaled, shaking his head. "This is crazy. I don't even know you." Claire looked at him then, really looked at him. "I know, and I hate that I'm putting you in this position. But you were the only one who showed kindness, the only one who noticed me on that bus. I had to take the chance." Jamal felt the weight of her words settle on his shoulders. He wanted to say no. He should say no. But something inside him, maybe his mom's voice in the back of his head, telling him to always help where he could, made it impossible to walk away. Before he could decide, the door chimed again. Jamal's instincts kicked in, and he glanced toward the entrance. The man in the dark jacket had stepped inside. His eyes swept the room, slow and calculating. When they landed on Claire, something in his expression shifted. Claire's breath caught. "It's him." Jamal sat up straighter, his mind racing. "We gotta go." Claire was already moving. She grabbed the flash drive and shoved it into Jamal's hand before slinging her bag over her shoulder. "Out the back," she whispered. Jamal didn't hesitate. He pocketed the drive and followed her as she weaved through the tables toward a narrow hallway at the back of the shop. He could feel the man's gaze burning into his back, knew they didn't have much time. As they pushed through the back door and into an alleyway, Claire grabbed his arm. "Listen to me. If something happens, if we get separated, don't come back here. Find Rebecca Hayes, tell her I sent you." Jamal nodded, his pulse hammering in his ears. Footsteps echoed behind them, heavy and fast. They had to run, and as they took off down the alley, Jamal knew this was no longer just some stranger's problem. Jamal's lungs burned as he sprinted down the alley, his feet pounding against the pavement. Claire was just ahead of him, her breath ragged, her hand gripping her stomach as she ran. Behind them, the heavy footsteps were closing in. He didn't dare look back. "Left," Claire gasped, pointing toward a narrow side street. Jamal followed without hesitation, his heart slamming against his ribs. The alley opened into a quieter block, rows of parked cars lining the curb. They needed cover, a place to hide. Up ahead, a delivery truck was parked near the sidewalk, engine still running. The driver stood a few feet away, talking to someone, his back turned. Claire grabbed Jamal's wrist and pulled him behind the truck. They crouched low, pressing their backs against the metal. Jamal clutched the flash drive in his pocket, fingers tightening around it like a lifeline. Claire closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. "We can't outrun them forever," she whispered. "They know I'm here now." Jamal peeked. Around the edge of the truck, the man in the dark jacket had just turned the corner, his eyes scanning the street. His pace was slower now, controlled. He wasn't chasing anymore. He was hunting. Jamal's stomach twisted. "He's looking for you," he muttered. Claire nodded, gripping his arm. "That's why you need to leave. Take the flash drive and get out of here. He doesn't know you have it yet." Jamal shook his head. "I'm not just leaving you." Claire's eyes softened, but there was urgency in them. "You don't have a choice. If they catch both of us, it's over. But if you can get this to Rebecca, there's still a chance." Jamal hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to stay, to help her. But deep down, he knew she was right. If he stayed, they'd both get caught. If he ran, at least one of them had a shot. Claire reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, shoving it into his hand. "That's her address. If I don't make it, you have to find her. Promise me." Jamal swallowed, Ard nodding. Before he could say anything else, Claire tensed. The man in the dark jacket was moving closer, his eyes narrowing. "Go," Claire whispered. Jamal's chest tightened, but he forced himself to move. Staying low, he slipped around the back of the truck, keeping it between him and the street. His mind raced as he scanned for an escape route. A bus was pulling up to a stop across the street. Without thinking, Jamal darted forward, keeping his head down. He reached the bus just as the doors hissed open. As he stepped on, he risked one last glance toward Claire. She had stepped out from behind the truck, walking toward the man in the jacket. He said something to her, something Jamal couldn't hear, but the way she lifted her chin, like she wasn't afraid, sent a chill through him. The bus doors closed, and it pulled away from the curb. Jamal clenched his jaw, forcing himself to breathe. He didn't know what was going to happen to Claire. He didn't know if he'd see her again. But he knew one thing. Whatever was on that flash drive, whatever truth she was risking everything for, he had to protect it. And he had to find Rebecca Hayes before it was too late.